There's Devin Nunes' cow, which is a parody account, obviously pretending to be a cow, hanging out in the dairy in Iowa looking for a little treasonous cowpoke. And another one called Devin Nunes' alt mom, which is clearly a parody. It bills itself as the not-so-proud alt mom of prolific libel tourist and part-time congressman Devin Nunes. Now, Nunes tried to force Twitter to unmask the parody accounts taunting him, filing a lawsuit in 2019. Again, a strange thing to do. Like, Twitter trolls are annoying, but who cares? He was unsuccessful. The case was dismissed last year. But then this happened. We just learned the Department of Justice of the United States of America, under Donald Trump and Attorney General Bill Barr, apparently took up Nunes' cause, secretly obtaining a grand jury subpoena last year in an attempt to identify the person behind a Twitter account dedicated to mocking Representative Devin Nunes of California, the alt mom account, according to a newly unsealed court document. Twitter fought the subpoena, as well as an associated gag order barring the company from talking about it publicly. And ultimately, the Times reports, according to a person familiar with the matter, the Justice Department withdrew the subpoena this spring after President Biden took office. Now, this is extremely anomalous behavior from the DOJ, and it comes on the heels of a bunch of news about possible abuses of power in that department under Bill Barr that we're just now finding out about. Barbara Mulcahy is a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, and she joins me now. All right, I thought there must be something wrong when I first saw this. When it first got published, I thought, oh, there's some mix-up here. They weren't actually trying to do this. So first, let me just start with this. Under what circumstances would the Department of Justice try to unmask an anonymous Twitter account?
Well, it could be a legitimate use in some context. For example, Chris, if someone were to tweet a threat about somebody,
right.
I'm going to kill Chris Hayes, and it's coming from an anonymous account, that would be an appropriate use of a grand jury subpoena. There's a federal statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 875C, that makes it a crime to threaten to kidnap or physically injure someone in interstate commerce. And so that would be appropriate to figure out who sent that threat so that person could be investigated, questioned, find out if they mean it, if they have the means to actually kill you. So there is a legitimate means for that when there is some evidence of a threatening communication.
But there is no indication. I mean, this was trolling. This was not threatening. And in fact, we have some exchanges that appear to show that, they were contending it was a threat, but there doesn't seem to be anything threatening. Like, is this an appropriate use, I guess, is the second question.
Well, yes, and that's what has the Twitter lawyers concerned, what prompted them to file this motion with the judge to challenge and quash the subpoena. Twitter responds to subpoenas all the time, but what got their attention in this case was it appeared that this subpoena was trying to criminalize free speech. It looked at this account to see if there was anything that was threatening about it, and it said there's not. It looks like just a lot of mockery of Devin Nunes, a lot of things about his politics, ridiculing him, and there's nothing that they found that seemed to demonstrate any sort of threat that would fit within that statute. And that was their basis for filing this motion. And in response, rather than saying, here's the threatening communication, the Department of Justice simply withdrew the subpoena. So I don't know if that means that there never was any threatening communication, or there's something they don't want to share. It's a little murky there, but I think that we're right to be concerned that this appears on its face to be a really blatant abuse of the grand jury power.
Okay, so here's so step one is we know Devin Nunes hates these Twitter accounts because he sued them. And I thought the whole time as I watched this unfold, I thought, man, this is so embarrassingly thin-skinned. Like, you're a public figure. It's the internet. Like, who cares, right? You're being mocked. It comes with the territory, buddy. Get another line of work. But whatever. It hurt his fifis. He was very sad about it. He wanted to use the legal process to make them stop making fun of him. Now, so that didn't work. Then we got the Justice Department attempting to go after one of these accounts, and it looks like 2 + 2 = 4, which is that the Occam's razor theory for what happened here is that someone in Devin Nunes' orbit passed along to the Department of Justice their frustration with this, right? I mean, we don't know, but it's hard to understand how it would come to that otherwise.
Yeah, on its face, it absolutely looks like that. And I think the real danger here is two things. One is the civil liberties intrusion of criminalizing free speech, of using a grand jury subpoena, which is for criminal investigations, to just try to get to the bottom of who is the anonymous person behind this particular Twitter account. I also think that as a former prosecutor, this has an institutional threat as well. Prosecutors are entrusted with a lot of authority to utilize grand jury subpoenas. They're used without court oversight so that prosecutors can act quickly and nimbly when they need to find someone who is truly threatening someone in interstate commerce. And if there is an abuse of that power, I worry that there will be a movement to curtail that power from even legitimate use.
That's such a good point. So this is the DOJ without a judge signing off, going to Twitter and be like, hey, give us this Twitter username, and Twitter saying, whoa, not so fast, right?
Yes, and Twitter is a pretty big institution. They have a strong legal staff. You wonder how many times have there been subpoenas submitted to other entities that didn't have the nerve to push back or the resources to push back. And so when you see this kind of abuse, it's good to see that Twitter challenged it and took them on, and that DOJ actually backed down when they did so. But how many people are not backing down in those situations? That's why I think this is a really dangerous abuse of power if it is what it appears to be.
Barbara McQuaid, thank you so much. That was great.
Thanks, Chris.
Why was the President of the United States whipping around a parking lot doing 80 miles an hour in a pickup truck today? The nation's first official White House climate advisor, Gina McCarthy, has the answer. You know what Americans love? Americans love pickup trucks, specifically Ford's F-Series, which has been among the top-selling vehicles in the U.S. for nearly 40 years. This year, for the first time, the best-selling Ford F-150 will have an all-electric model called the F-150 Lightning. While the truck won't be officially unveiled until tomorrow, the president got a test drive today.
Mr. President!
This sucker's quick.
How's it drive? Mr. President, would you buy one of these?
I would.
How does it feel to be behind the wheel, sir?
It feels great. I tell you what, this sucker's good. Now, I don't have anybody at the stopwatch, but I think we're going 0 to 60 in about 4.3. 4.4? Right. 4 flat?
Well, give a release to President.
I should be quiet.
Mr. President, how fast were you going?
Well, okay, I'm just going to step on it. I'll come off at 80 miles an hour and see what it is, okay? Ready?
Mr. President, can I ask you a quick question on Israel before you drive away?
No, you can't. Not unless you get in front of the car and step on it. I'm on the tease. Okay, here we go. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Ready?
You know, it's right. The pickup on electric vehicles is amazing because they don't have the latency of a gas combustion engine. It just accelerates just right away. Biden was in Michigan specifically to visit Ford's electric plant in Dearborn and highlight American-made electric vehicles and electric batteries as part of his big jobs, climate, and infrastructure agenda.
My name is Joe Biden, and I'm a car guy. The future of the auto industry is electric. There's no turning back. The real question is whether we'll lead or we'll fall behind in the race to the future, or whether we'll build these vehicles and the batteries that go in them here in the United States or rely on other countries, or whether the jobs to build these vehicles and batteries are good-paying union jobs with benefits, jobs that will sustain and grow the middle class. Right now, China is leading in this race, but I got news for them. They will not win this race. We can't let them. We have to move fast, and that's what you're doing here.
As former administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, now senior advisor to the White House on climate, Gina McCarthy knows what's at stake here as well as anyone, and she joins me now. It's great to have you on. So the big pledge, the sort of headline pledge of the Biden administration is halving American carbon emissions by 2030. How much of that is in the vehicle space, as you understand it?
Well, transportation is really big, and obviously we're very excited about the movement to electric vehicles, especially vehicles being put together by union workers with parts in the United States of America, including batteries now being manufactured here. So there is a big transition to electric vehicles, and as you can see from President Biden, they're kind of great performance vehicles that you'd really want to drive. So the importance of today was really to put this iconic model F-150 and to show people that electric vehicles aren't just about city dwellers, they are actually working vehicles, and we can really take advantage of that. But you know, utilities as well, the energy sector has to be a part of the effort. We're also looking at investments in transit. We're looking at consumer rebates to get them to buy the vehicles of the future. We're looking at rebuilding our manufacturing, grabbing back the supply chain that we've lost to other countries. So this isn't about building or producing second-rate cars or products. It's really about how do we grow good union jobs and at the same time start grabbing the opportunities of the future right here in the United States of America.
So we know that there's going to be a huge bunch of electric vehicles this year. So things are moving, you know, they're moving in the right direction just in terms of market forces. You got Ford developing plans to develop and produce electric vehicle batteries. So, and they can then, you know, I know this is true of GM too, where they sort of bootstrap their own platform. That's then modular. They could use it for a bunch of different models. The Edmunds folks say that 30 EVs from 21 brands will become available for sale this year compared to 17 from 12 brands in 2020. I guess the question is, how much can the market do on its own? And how much does the jobs plan need to get passed, or do there need to be investments by the government to get to those targets of having emissions by 2030?
Well, it's very clearly that that the market can do a lot on its own. You don't just have Ford and GM, but you got Volkswagen, you got Volvo. I mean, we're talking about Hyundai. I mean, everybody is going electric, and the question is who's going to win in that race and who's going to capture these markets. So, but it's also important to recognize that in the American Jobs Plan, there are incentives that will help consumers be able to afford these vehicles. We know that soon they're going to have parity with the cost of combustion engines, but we want them to have parity now. We want consumers to have opportunities for rebates. We want to actually provide benefits to companies that have union workers and to actually manufacture these batteries. We want to have opportunities for our manufacturing upstream in the entire supply chain. So we're talking about grants and loans and other opportunities that we can bring to the table. And the American Jobs Plan will accelerate everything we're doing, everything from electric vehicles to transit to buses. I mean, we are talking about transforming our transportation sector so that we're ready to build the future, not just rely on what we had in the past. That's what President Biden means about Build Back Better. And it's just a start, because we're looking at investments in broadband. We're looking at investments in the future that's really going to point us to win in this economic challenge that we face right now. And Lord knows the pandemic is getting close to being behind us, and we want it to be there. Now's the time to look at hope and opportunity, new jobs, good paying jobs, really building the future in a way that we're going to be proud to hand to our kids, because it's going to be low carbon, it's going to address the issue of climate change, and provide us an opportunity to live healthier and safer lives. That's what it's all about.
We should know there's a bunch of cars coming out of Detroit, American manufactured. The Hummer, there's going to be an all-electric Hummer, which right now is a concept car, which I think is moving to production here. I got to actually see one up close, which is pretty cool, at least the sort of concept model. So there's a whole bunch of stuff coming out. I guess here's the question. This number stuck with me. So if you want to hit that target by we want to be at zero emissions at national level by 2030, you need 95% to 100% of sales in new light-duty vehicles in the U.S. by 2030. I mean, can we get there? I guess is the question. Like that, it's easy to say stuff, but can we get to that target? That's 9 years from now.
Well, we got to that target of 50% below 2005 levels by 2030 by looking at the transportation sector, by looking at the power sector. We want clean energy by 2035, not just net zero by 2050. We looked at our housing stock. We looked at our ability to be able to grab carbon and maintain it in the soil and in our oceans. So it is a system approach where we may not get to the exact level we're looking for in transportation, but we can make it up another way. So we want to be on that trajectory to get to 2050 zero, and we can do it in a variety of ways, and we're going to try them all.
All right, Gina McCarthy, thanks so much for making time tonight.
Thank you, Chris.
Still to come, Senator.
When McCarthy finally reached the president on January 6th and asked him to publicly and forcefully call off the riot, the president initially repeated the falsehood that it was Antifa that had breached the Capitol. McCarthy refuted that and told the president that these were Trump supporters. That's when, according to McCarthy, the president said, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are."
They are barricaded in a building being invaded by a mob that is beating up cops left and right. He's saying, call off the dogs, Mr. President, and that's what he gets back. Movie villain level menacing from Donald Trump, who was talking to people that were at that moment. Kevin McCarthy enough to relay the conversation later on to a colleague. All of that would be part of the January 6th inquiry naturally. And of course, Kevin McCarthy was also one of the 147 Republicans, a majority of the caucus, who voted to overturn the election, to defy the will of the people and install the loser over the winner. Now, given McCarthy's title, his role in the insurrection, and his call with the president, one can imagine he doesn't want to be a principal subject in the inquiry. Although, I have to say, it is still strange that he apparently played along with the idea he might support it. I mean, last night, in this very program, sitting at this very desk, right? If you watch the program, we had Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi on the show. Now, Thompson's the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, and he spent 4 months negotiating with the ranking member of that committee. That would be Congressman John Katko of New York, who's a Republican. And he told me the two of them negotiated to reach a bipartisan deal on this January 6th inquiry. They engaged in lots of, the classic good faith bipartisan congressional work, the kind of stuff that used to happen a fair amount, still happens. It's stuff that's kind of in the background of Congress. And Congressman Thompson said Kevin McCarthy was part of the negotiations, and he has the receipts.
Kevin McCarthy, he knew about it. He exchanged letters with us saying he wanted to see certain things. So he was engaged all the time. The Republican leadership needs to step up. If we have to produce the letters that the minority leader wrote to us saying, this is what I want in the bill, I mean, we'll do that.
Okay. Now McCarthy has decided to flip the table over. It's honestly more surprising he was ever engaging in good faith, because we know what his boss in Mar-a-Lago thinks about the whole situation, and we know what the rising power in his own caucus thinks about it. Here's Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia on the House floor today explicitly defending the honor of the January 6th insurrectionists.
While it's catch and release for domestic terrorists, Antifa, BLM, the people who breached the Capitol on January 6th are being abused, some even being held for 23 hours a day in solitary confinement.
She literally describes them as people who breached the Capitol, as if there's nothing wrong with that. Look, the lesson here is you cannot straddle the big lie. The truth of what happened and the big lie repel each other. Donald Trump did not win the election, Joe Biden did, and you cannot put one foot on each and hope to stand. That's the lesson for all Republicans. It's the lesson we're seeing down in Arizona, a state in which Republicans have already used the excuse of the big lie to ram through voting restrictions signed into law by the governor on a party line, if I'm not mistaken. The big lie has already played its useful purpose in restricting access to the ballot box after Republicans lost that state. Now there's a small group of Maricopa County Republicans coming out to defend the integrity of the elections they personally oversaw against the both clownish and insidious privatized audit taking place.
We asked the difficult questions, all right? And we certified the election back in November. But now it's time to say enough is enough. It is time to push back on the big lie.
It's long past time, but okay, better late than never. I think those folks there that you saw, they understand you cannot let this stand. You cannot wink, wink, nudge, nudge it. You either have to be for the big lie or against it, and they have declared against it. And they've done it collectively because, as one of the Maricopa Republicans told Lawrence O'Donnell last night, if you stick your neck out, it will get chopped off. Congressman Joe Nunes, Democrat from Florida, serves in the House Rules Committee, also served as an impeachment manager during the second trial of Donald Trump, and he joins me now. What was the conversation on the Hill today among your Democratic colleagues? Just text messages, what were you guys saying when McCarthy comes out against this thing that Benny Thompson had been negotiating with John Katko under the auspices of leadership's approval?
Well, it's good to be with you, Chris, and I'm proud to represent Colorado in the Congress, although I am a fan of Florida. But
did I just say Florida?
No, it's all right.
Did I seriously just say Florida?
I may have misheard it.
Okay, I'm sorry. You're from Colorado. Let's get that right. Boulder, in fact.
Of course. So, look, it's maddening. It's maddening, and yet it's totally unsurprising. I mean, I think your analogy is a really apt one, and the way you described it. But I actually don't think that the minority leader has really tried to have it both ways. I mean, his complicity in perpetuating the big lie has been well known for quite some time now. And I think what is most confounding is that typically, at least the minority leader would try to create some veneer of being a responsible and thoughtful leader. And that just simply isn't the case in this instance. He is doing what the base of his caucus ultimately demands, which, of course, is what, as you said, the former president demands. And that's to ensure that this commission doesn't go forward, so that his complicity in perpetuating that big lie and the complicity of others isn't exposed. There's no cogent rebuttals to why this commission isn't the most prudent step forward.
No, it's all bad faith nonsense. I mean, Scalise wrote a letter today, and obviously Scalise was the victim of a horrible act of political violence. He was shot by a man, I think, who was animated by political animus, along with, I think, other issues. He survived. He had to go through a lengthy period of rehab. It was a brutal and awful day for this country, for the Republican caucus, for him and his family. He made the point, that any political violence not related to January 6th, wouldn't be able to be studied. But the point is to study January 6th and what led up to it. And so you've got Scalise now recommending a no vote. They're not whipping against it. But I guess my question to you is, what's the game here? Were they lying before? Did they have a change of heart? I don't get why you pretend to go along and then pull the rug out.
I think it's because they were trying to avoid the political consequences of taking the position that they have now taken, which I think the American public is clearly not going to support, right? I mean, folks understand that the insurrection on January 6th was one of the darkest days for our democracy, and that it makes sense to pull together a bipartisan commission to look into the events of January 6th further and make recommendations to the broader Congress from a security perspective about what guardrails we need to put into place in the future prospectively. That makes sense to the vast majority of the American public. And the minority leader and the minority whip know it. And so I think they had hoped that they could fly under the radar for as long as they could. And now, ultimately, this bipartisan deal that was negotiated has forced them into announcing their opposition. But I'll just say this, Chris. It is the theater of the absurd. What's happening in Arizona, what happened with respect to the representative you mentioned earlier this week from Georgia, describing the insurrectionists as tourists, even though there's a picture of him helping the security personnel barricade the door of the House floor. It is theater of the absurd, and yet we know it will have dangerous consequences, because there were many of us who called what happened in October and November and December regarding the perpetuation of the big lie as theater of the absurd, and the consequence was the insurrection on January 6th.
Yeah, and I think that just the final point here, it's clear the strategy here from Republicans is to treat the question of who won the election like a Trump tweet, like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Like they're just going to avoid it or not talk about it. You can't do it. I mean, it's not tenable. So you're either going to sign up with this sort of insane, insidious, toxic, destructive, possibly violence-facilitating conspiracy theory, or you're going to say the plain truth and keep saying it. But they want to avoid it, and I don't think they could do it.
No, I agree, because it goes to the heart, a bedrock principle of our constitutional republic, which is the legitimacy of our elections and the peaceful transfer of power. And the more that those conspiracy theories metastasize, the more dangerous the consequences could be for our republic. So, look, it's why we need more leaders of good faith, folks like Liz Cheney and others, to stand up and speak up for the truth, regardless of the political consequences that they clearly will face from their own party.
Congressman Joe Neguse, and I want to if I did say Florida, I want to defend, I apologize, A, and B, I want to defend the honor of my very, very fine and detail-oriented staff, because I'm looking at it says Colorado on prompter. So if I invented that error, that is 100% of yours truly, and I apologize to you.
I may have misheard it. Well, you're welcome to Colorado anytime, Chris.
All right. Michelle Goldberg is a New York Times columnist and MSNBC political analyst. She recently wrote a column about the growing Republican embrace of authoritarianism titled How Republicans Could Steal the 2024 Election, and she joins me now. Michelle, what do you make of the Arizona situation? Is so fascinating to me for a bunch of reasons. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that, they do need a level of plausible deniability to get away with making these kind of radical changes to voting laws. So actually, the people who want to restrict voting in Arizona, the people who want to basically change the law so that the sort of honorable public servants that you just saw, the Maricopa officials who said this is ridiculous, what you're seeing in some other states are laws that are designed to disempower them and to vest power with the legislature that tends to be much more partisan and kind of stay much more in line. But in order to do that, it doesn't really help you if you have a bunch of crazy people looking for bamboo fibers or whatever it is that they're doing in Arizona, right? It's not great for them that this becomes a national laughingstock. And also, the longer they drag it out, it's just... they keep whipping up animus against the local officials who, according to the true believers, won't admit that this terrible fraud took place. And so it puts people in real danger.
Yeah, and what I keep finding fascinating from just a human perspective, and you're seeing it play out in Maricopa County, is, in my experience as a reporter, as a person in the world, right, people tend to take pride in their work, and they're kind of... they're very turf-oriented, and inside institutions and political movements and companies and movements, all sorts of places, people throw elbows around when you come into their turf and say, like, you have done a bad job. And it's amazing to me how much that's been happening and people have rolled over. So it's to say, well, you idiots oversaw some fraudulent election, to finally, months later, half the people that oversaw the county election say, well, no, actually, we didn't. We did our job. Or John Katko, who spent 4 months hammering out legislative language with Benny Thompson, only have McCarthy sent to the bus. It's like, no one has any professional pride for their work. No one stands up for themselves. It's incredible.
I mean, I think when you talk about John Katko, I think the 4 months is really important, because the politics of this thing looked pretty different 4 months ago than they do now. And there's this phenomenon we see with Trump over and over again, where occasionally the veil drops, the horror of it all becomes undeniable, and even people who have been shameless lackeys have to respond, right? That was a theme of his entire presidency. Mm-hmm. It was a theme of his campaign with the Access Hollywood tape. And then the ultimate example of that was January 6th, when you saw Mitch McConnell really react in horror, and you thought that this might be the moment that they're going to try to purge this man from the party and go in a different direction. It's only for their own self-interest, right? Because he just lost in the election and there's other people with ambitions to take his place. But it just doesn't last. And the more time goes by, the more he's able to sort of wrap at least the people within his ideological movement in this impenetrable alternative reality. And the more people who want to represent that movement have to pretend to buy into it.
Yeah, and Caco's an interesting